On your Friday episode of Locked On Raptors, Ron Holland, Matas Buzelis, Zaccharie Risacher all could be there if the Raptors keep their pick in the top six. Who would be the best fit? Who's got the highest upside? We break them all down on today's show. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, April the 26th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the Busted Hell website at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors. And of course, you can join us over on the Locked On Raptors Discord server, a great place to come hang out, talk about the draft, talk about fake trades, talk about the playoffs, talk about the Denver Nuggets absolutely owning the LA Lakers. So much good stuff going down in the Discord. Come be part of our listener community. We'd love to see you. Link in the description of the podcast. It's free to join. Get in there, would you? All right. You can also find the show for free wherever you get your podcasts on the audio side of things. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. Always appreciated when you support the show, however you support the show in its audio forms. You can also find the show on YouTube and subscribe to the Locked On Raptors channel. When you do that, hit the notification bell button as well, and you will get a heads up via push notification every single time the show is about to premiere or go live that says, hey, stop, Sean's talking, come hang out. And thank you to those of you who are, in fact, hanging out right now and have taken those directions and applied them to your daily life. All right. On today's show, we are picking up a little bit of a thread that I started earlier this week in the episode I did talking about Alex Sarr and the potential of the Raptors moving up into the top 4 on lottery night. What happens if they stay in the top 6? Should they trade back? All of that stuff. Talked about Alex Sarr as the clear no-brainer guy you take if he's there for you if you move up in the lottery. After that, though, it's a little more dicey. And I think the reason why is 3 of the players we're going to talk about today, all projected to go in the top 10 of the draft at basically every outlet you look at, and all 3 of whom boast serious questions about what they're actually going to be in the NBA and how they might fit with the Toronto Raptors and the, core pieces and pillars they already have in place. So today's show, we're going to do little scouting reports on Ron Holland and Matas Buzelis of the G League Ignite and Zaccharie Risacher, whose name I am going to say poorly a lot because I can't pronounce his name properly. It doesn't come off the tongue smoothly. Maybe I'll get the reps down today. Either way, the French wing from JL Bourg, who is also projected to go in the top 10 of the draft. We're going to talk about those 3 guys today and figure out who's the right fit, who's the best fit. Are any of these guys even worth picking in the top 6? There's many, many questions, many things to like as well, which we'll get to on today's show. Let's start with Ron Holland. If you're not familiar with Ron Holland's work, he's listed at 6'8". He's a wing, played for the G League Ignite this season, turns 19 a couple weeks after the draft. So he's one of the younger guys in the class going into this year's draft in June. Has a 6'10.5" wingspan. I don't buy that he's 6'8". When you watch the tape and you watch him just kind of compare to other guys on the G League Ignite, on just the other teams the G League Ignite was playing, he looks more like he's 6'6", 6'7" to me. Maybe that doesn't really matter because he's an incredible athlete. That's the thing that pops off the screen when you watch Ron Holland play. I totally get the appeal if you are a Ron Holland head. He's a really enticing athlete, open court finisher, tons of ups, super high motor, which makes the athleticism kind of really pop off the screen as well. It's an interesting, just athletic package. I think of all the guys we're going to talk about today, Buzelis, Holland, and Zaccharie Risacher, I think Holland is pretty clearly the highest upside athlete of these guys, which counts for a lot, obviously. When you're picking high in the draft and you're talking about quote unquote best player available, which is a phrase I hate because how the hell does anybody know? But obviously, athleticism is a thing that often factors into those decisions. And so I understand if people view Holland as the best of this trio of potential wings who might be there for the Raptors if they jump up in the lottery, maybe not to number 1, but at 2, 3, 4, or they stay at number 6. All these guys could very well be there. Holland to me has the most just like athletic ceiling or however you want to frame it. I do think, just kind of reiterate a point I made earlier this week, right? The talent, the upside, the best player available thing is nice. I don't think that can be the only consideration in this range of this particular draft. I think fit for this Raptors team has to matter. This Raptors team is not your classic rebuilding team. They have the key pieces who are going to be the fulcrums of this team going forward already in place. Scottie Barnes is here. Immanuel Quickley is here. RJ Barrett, I guess you can quibble and debate whether or not he's a clear, no doubt core piece or someone who might get moved out down the line. I think right now the team fancies him a core piece, and so will operate as such. RJ Barrett is part of the core, the BBQ trio, et cetera, et cetera. And so you have to be drafting with at least some eye towards fit around those guys. In particular, like shooting has to be part of the equation for anyone that you're fancying is going to fit into those guys, into the plans with those guys long term. I think having someone who can push RJ Barrett to the 2 is also would be a really nice value. It's why I'm not super keen on, say, Stephon Castle, who is also in this range, also technically a wing, although I think he skews more guard in terms of how he plays. He's also like 6'5", 6'6", and I don't think he's quite got the size, length, reach, all that stuff that you want to ideally have RJ Barrett be your 2 guard. I think you want someone who's got some juice, who's got some length, who's got some defensive chops on the ball, who can also shoot the 3. Like that to me is the perfect fit alongside Barnes and Quickley and Barrett. And look, that might be available here. Ron Holland, I think there's a chance if the 3-point shot comes along, is that guy. I am just like not terribly enthused about the 3-point shot with Ron Holland. And we'll get into the things that could make him a nice fit, but I do think a lot of what Ron Holland brings to the table as a player, based on, watching some tape, reading up on his scouting report from people in the know, and just like a full-on caveat before we get any further on this episode. I fancy myself someone who knows what they're looking at when they watch basketball games. I'm not a scout. I am not a professional. I'm not Raphael or Rich or any of the guys who do wonderful work over there at Locked In NBA Big Board. I don't profess to be. I try to take the consensus. I try to take what the smart people whose opinions I value are saying about guys, look at the numbers, combine it with my own sort of takes and feelings from watching these guys, and just come up with an opinion that most likely will be kind of wrong. It's the thing with the draft is we're all very wrong all the time, but hopefully these opinions are a little bit informed and offer a bit of an insight into these guys. But anyway, to get back on track, I think with Ron Holland, the fit thing is a real concern for me, because when you watch him, the 2 guys who I think he kind of invokes, and it's not exact. Obviously, player comps are, I think, pretty silly a lot of the time, because the best part of basketball is how every player is different. But there are 2 guys in particular who, when you kind of squint, you see, oh, okay, that's kind of like guys we already know here. And it's Scottie Barnes and RJ Barrett. I think RJ Barrett, he's just this sort of bull of a man getting to the rim. I think Ron Holland's going to stand a chance of being just like that, a really, really effective slasher, really quick first step. That's where that athleticism really comes in. And then the Scottie Barnes comparison is he does feel like he's kind of going to be like a playmaking 4 type of player, where he's got the ball in his hands a little bit, point forwardy type of guy, running the break and transition, ball in his hands. And I just think a lot of what he does is just sort of a lesser version of what Scottie Barnes does for the Raptors right now. And look, with the G League Ignite guys, it's so hard to evaluate. The Ignite is no longer a thing because it was not a very good developmental environment. And obviously with NIL money coming into college basketball, it just kind of rendered the G League Ignite kind of moot. But the system they had there, it's just a lot of young dudes trying to make a claim for themselves, not a ton in terms of veteran adult play to tie things together. Yeah, they've had Amir Johnson and Jack types over the years, and I think John Jenkins was a guy who they had as a vet on these teams in recent years. Guys who you've heard of, who've played in the NBA, who have had nice careers, but not guys at this stage who are setting the table for development for other players. And I think that's kind of where the G League Ignite experiment fell apart. Is just it's really hard for a bunch of teens to figure out how to play productive basketball. And when they're playing this kind of chaos ball, it's hard to evaluate sort of where the G League Ignite influence stops and the beginning of the actual flaws of players begin. It's a very blurry thing. And so it's hard to evaluate. But based on what we've seen from Ron Holland, I do think there's just a little bit too much an overlap with RJ Barrett and Scottie Barnes to really get the most out of him if they were to draft him to the Raptors, right? I think that has to be a consideration. You're not drafting Ron Holland for the first couple seasons, where in theory, if he does similar things to Scottie and RJ, great, bring him off the bench. You can have stylistic continuity, run your stuff, have him be part of the sets you run those guys in and have him come up that way. That's great, but you're not drafting Ron Holland for the first couple of years where he's filling in as a role player. You're drafting Ron Holland with a top 6 pick, theoretically hoping he can become a no-doubt starter for you down the line. And I think that's a much more difficult path to see if RJ Barrett is in fact going to be on this team long-term. In between Scottie Barnes there, like if the shooting, which to be clear is not good from Ron Holland, 24% this season at G League Ignite. It's, the free throw shooting kind of high 60s, low 70s based on the various competitions the G League teams play in. It's not like it indicates a clear, shooting stroke is coming. I think of all these guys today, his 3-point shot is the one I believe in the least. And to me, I think that has to be a red flag. As much as the athleticism is tantalizing, I think you're only going to get so much if you put him into a team where he doesn't quite fit with the other guys. And frankly, I think Ron Holland should probably want to end up somewhere different as well. I think the overlap with Scottie Barnes and RJ Barrett could be very, very real. And he might not reach his own ceiling if he's playing for the Raptors as well. As far as what he brings to the table defensively, which is another key thing here, obviously I'm prioritizing 3-point shooting and defense with these wing types. And, it's why I'm keen on the idea of trading back potentially, because I do like the sort of blend of shooting and defense you get from a lot of the guys later in the draft, maybe have less high upside play potential, but just seem like more ready-made role players. With Holland, the defense, it's interesting. He's got a super high motor. He makes big plays, and I think he probably ends up being a good to very good defender down the line. It's hard to say because the G League Ignite was an absolute mess and they got just absolutely run off the floor a whole bunch. There's inconsistencies, there's young guys stuff, but with the motor, the athleticism, the bounciness, I think there's a really good defender in there. Wing stopper type, we'll see. I don't think that's really been anything that I've heard people kind of suggest him to be, but certainly he's got the athleticism that you like to see on the wings with the size and all of that. Again, though, I have a really hard time when it comes to the shooting, and 24% is really tough to overlook. We like to think anyone can just learn how to shoot. It's just not how it works. Yes, some guys do, but those guys end up becoming outlier cases. You can't build your team and your hopes and your draft, processes as much as you might believe in yourself and your ability to develop guys into shooters. It's a hard thing to do. Most teams don't do that. Most guys who project this poorly this early on will end up being probably no better than sort of slightly below league average. That's just the odds of it happening. The odds of a Herb Jones-like jump that we saw this season from a guy who was miserable in college as a 3-point shooter, those things don't happen all the time. And you can't bank on that happening just because you picked him and you think you're smart. And so I think right now, to me, Holland projects, like I said, is kind of like a playmaking 4 without a real 3-point shot. And that's just a really tough player to fit in anywhere anyway, let alone when they already have Scottie Barnes, whose own 3-point shot is improved, but we're not sure if it's dead eye. We're not sure if he's going to be a knockdown guy, if he's just going to be a passable sort of take him on the catch when they come to him type of guy long term. It just seems like a lot of shooting deficiency to have in a core group of guys. And for that reason, I think Holland for me is probably, we'll get to my ranking of these 3 guys as we continue the show, as I kind of talk it all out here. But right now, Holland for me is the type of guy, if Buzelis and Risacher are off the board and it's just Holland at 6, for example, I think I'm looking at trading back to get more shots in that range with more of the sort of 3-and-D projectable wings who can kind of bank on being good role players. It's just the kind of reality of where the Raptors sit right now and the reality of this class, which doesn't boast anyone near the top who I think is going to go become a no-doubt star. I don't think Ron Holland with his package right now is going to go become a no-doubt star. Totally could be wrong on that, and he could totally be one of those outlier cases. But for now, I'm not super sold on Ron Holland as much as I think a lot of the pieces of his game are really interesting. I think they're probably more interesting on most other teams and not the Toronto Raptors. We'll come back on the other side. We'll get into Matas Buzelis, who is very interesting, very weird player. I want to like him. I'm not sure how much I do. We'll get to that coming up in just 1 second. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call in for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. You can also, if you want to scale up the size, go to the 2024 Nissan Armada, which will change what you expect from a full-size SUV. Picture a rugged 4x4 that can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style, tow bigger, and explore further in the 2024 Armada. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada, and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. Today's show is also brought to you by BetterHelp. And look, it's an interesting time of year, right? It's the weather's turning around. You got busy lives, you got stuff going on, and maybe you have like career changes on the horizon. Maybe you're trying to fulfill some goals that you set for yourself at the start of the year. Either way, whatever it is you're going through in your life, whether you're reacting to big trauma and trying to sort through that, or you are dealing with the sort of day-to-day rigors that life throws at you, having a therapist to talk about stuff in an unbiased way with you is a wonderful thing to have. It helps you establish what your values are, what decisions will align with those values to help keep you happy and keep you feeling like the best version of yourself. It's a great thing. I know a lot of people who have really, really benefited from therapy. Maybe that can help you as well. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team, and it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Back at it here, talking about wing prospects in the high lottery. Talked about Ron Holland, the sort of probably the highest profile guy at the G League Ignite this year. Let's get into his teammate, who was less productive. Holland averaged around 20 a game. Gets to the 6-7 boards, 3 assists. Matas Buzelis, his teammate, a little bit less featured in that G League Ignite team. 14 points a game for him, 7 boards, couple assists throughout the regular season. Slightly lower production in the Showcase Cup. But overall, a big part of that Ignite team as well that features guys like Tyler Smith as well, who could very well be in the mix for the Raptors at 19. I'm sure we'll talk about him at some point as well. Bit of like a stretchy big type who maybe doesn't play a lick of defense. We'll talk about Tyler Smith another time. But Matas Buzelis, a guy who I think like the optimized version of him might just be the best fit here. I think, just to give the measurables, 6'10", hybrid forward type, 19 years old when the next season starts, 6'10" wingspan for him. So basically even wingspan with his height. So that's like a bit of a drawback. And for me, like his 3-point shot might even be more of a swing skill than it is for Ron Holland, because I think Ron Holland has a lot to offer, without having to be a good 3-point shooter for whatever team drafts him. Matas Buzelis, not to say that he doesn't have a lot to offer, but I think he's got less off the bounce juice than Ron Holland does, less sort of potency as a slasher and an attacker. And I think just sort of the way he plays, it's really going to necessitate him to be a good 3-point shooter, or at least an average 3-point shooter. There's a world in which Matas Buzelis, who shot 27% from deep at the G League Ignite this year, and I think kind of let people down with that. I think there was an expectation he was going to be a better 3-point shooter than that. The jump shot, I am no jump shot mechanic by any means. If you saw my jump shot, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. But I do think, like, just kind of looking at it, I've seen lots of guys' jump shots. You look at his jump shot versus Ron Holland. I think Buzelis probably a little bit smoother. It's much higher. He's a 6'10" guy. Like, it's really tough to block his shot. He's got a really high release point. But again, 27%, it's not super inspiring. And I think when you bake in the fact that on offense, he's kind of robotic looking. His 3-point shots are basically always, catch and shoot, stand still. He's not moving around. He's not shooting off balance. It's like 2 feet planted, catch, put up, shoot. And look, that's fine. If you're offering space and effectively knocking down 36, 37, 38, 40% of your threes from a stationary position, then that's great. That's super helpful. But I do wonder about the sort of ability to, hit those shots. Like, again, 27% from deep, not so great. and also to kind of create the next advantage if it swings to him in a sequence of offense. And I think this is super important for Darko Rajakovic basketball, right? There are certain things he does quite well. I think like he's a pretty decent like connective passer from what I've watched. But when you look at his overall sort of ball in hand skill set, like I said, very robotic. Like he's very upright the way he dribbles. And he just doesn't have a whole lot of shake to him. He's not like bumping guys. He's not getting guys off of him. He's not putting guys on his hip. He's very much, okay, ball comes to me, I'm going to try to drive. And most of the time, guys are just kind of stonewalling him, and he's got to make the next play or pull up from three. It's not like a super explosive off the bounce package. The thing that really interests me with Buzelis is his defense. Even with only a 6'10" wingspan, you look at a lot of his tape from the G League Ignite, just some like pretty interesting defensive playmaking stuff. I think he looks a lot less robotic moving his feet on defense than he does on offense. It's kind of like the inverse of RJ Barrett, where RJ Barrett has, like not very good defensive footwork, kind of gets moved off his spot very easily. On offense, he's just so forceful and powerful, and he's just like a magnet to the rim. It's kind of the opposite with Buzelis, where it's, the offense, it's very, again, plodding, robotic. He's not getting a ton of separation. Defensively, he looks like pretty light on his feet. The hips move nice. He stays in front of guys. He can hang with, smaller guys on the perimeter, and sort of working as like a low help man is a pretty interesting spot for him as well. At 6'10", like there's a outside chance he could like be a small ball 5 for you at times. Like I think the idea of Buzelis and Scottie Barnes as like a small ball 4-5 is pretty interesting. It's not super small ball. You're not putting a 6'7" guy at center or anything like that. It's like a 6'10" guy who's got, some pretty decent like shot blocking timing. I believe looking through one of the rundowns on No Ceilings about Matas Buzelis is he has the highest stocks and blocks percentage of any G League Ignite wing to come through the program over the past many years. That includes guys like, Marshawn Beauchamp and Jonathan Kuminga. He's right at the top. Leonard Miller, Dyson Daniels, like he is at the top when it comes to steal and block percentages. And so like, that's pretty interesting as far as a guy who can be like a cog in a team that badly needs defensive playmaking and just defensive upside. Do I think he has like the same explosive athleticism, like wing stopper chops that Ron Holland might have at the top end of his outcomes? Maybe not, but I think as like a team defender, there's a lot there with Buzelis from what I've seen. And so I have a hard time with him, right? Like if he's there for the Raptors at 6 or they jump up and he's the guy that they want, like not sure how I'd feel. I think obviously my philosophy on this draft, I've said it before on this show, is get as many wings as possible. These are the hardest types of players to find and the most important players for completing the puzzle that the Raptors are trying to build right now. And so, like, I don't think you can turn your nose up at Buzelis or Holland or Risacher or whoever's there if you're picking at 6 or in the top 4. But again, because I have pretty serious questions about these guys as well, I think trading back remains like a pretty interesting potential option for the Raptors. Maybe they don't do that. It's hard to make trades and they just pick a guy. You'll be happy if they take one of these guys. It's a worthwhile shot. But I think I'd just prefer like more shots if you can get more shots later in the draft by trading back. Maybe you get a second pick for next season or something like that. Either way, I think it's a very strange, interesting player. There's some interesting like screen and dive stuff, kind of, going back into the small ball 5 conversation with Buzelis. Again, the defense works. He also seems like, just anecdotally, like kind of an MFer. And, that's always fun. I think he's like, called out guys wanting to like play one-on-one before the draft. Maybe that's like Jan Vesely level misplaced belief in oneself, or Mario Hezonja. We've seen a few of these Euros come out of the draft in a few years past where like their confidence is just through the roof. Sometimes the confidence is totally backed up. It's hard to say. The guy's 19. But yeah, I think because of the rigidity on offense, I'm not like super keen on Buzelis. Might actually prefer Holland to him at this point, because I'm having a hard time really seeing the optimized version of Buzelis kind of slotting into the Darko offense and really kind of keeping plays moving, making the next thing happen because of that sort of robotic on the ball work. Again, he's 19 years old. It could totally come. There's obviously a lot of skill here. And I'm not writing him off being a very good player by any means, but just on the stuff we know right now, I am a little bit dubious about his potential fit with the Raptors because of the shooting. Like if it's not there, all the other weaknesses get amplified, right? If he's not hitting his threes, he's gonna, be kind of driving straight into sagging off defenses if it ever swings to him. That's not a good thing. Like I don't think he's got like Pascal Siakam level shake to him where he's going to drive into a guy and use the space in front of him as like a launch pad for a spin move or a move that kind of leaves a guy in the dust. He just kind of feels like he's going to drive into trouble, have to pick up his dribble and go reset and kind of keep the offense flowing from a place of disadvantage. It's tricky stuff. Like I'll watch these guys more, obviously, and I'll have probably more refined opinions on them. We're just kind of getting these guys out of the way now because there's every possibility the Raptors won't have a top 6 pick. And so I don't want to go the entire draft season without talking about these guys. I think they're worthwhile to consider right now as we wait in limbo, figuring out where the Raptors will pick. But yeah, with Buzelis, I wanted to like him a lot more, but the handle's not super interesting. Not as much as Holland's is. I think the defense probably skews a little bit more exciting and tantalizing than Holland's, just because of the help stuff. But I think Holland's upside is maybe a little bit higher, just as like a guy who can slide his feet and stay in front of big wings. It's tough, but I want to like them. I really do. I want to like all these guys, but this draft just feels very frustrating because it's like you see a skeleton of a player who you really want to dig and you really want to be like, that's the guy. This is the perfect fit. It's just hard to find that perfect fit. And with Buzelis, I think it might even be a lesser obvious fit than it is with Ron Holland, even with the overlap issues I talked about with Ron Holland. I don't think that overlap is there with Buzelis. I think he'd be kind of a unique player on the Raptors, which maybe is enough to make him the pick as well. But I think the questions about his offense are pretty legitimate. And I think he can't overcome those questions the same way Ron Holland can just by being like a crazy athlete slasher type. I think it's going to be a lot harder for Buzelis to be someone who generates rim pressure. Like I don't see that really being a thing that's going to be a strength of his. And with that, I think like if it gets to the point where it's at number 6 and it's, say Ron Holland is the only guy left at 6, I think I just take Ron Holland and go for the upside play. If Buzelis is the only guy at 6, then I may be trading back. I may be trading back in both situations. I don't know. I'm kind of all over the place with these guys, but bear with me as I sort through my thoughts. We'll come back on the other side and get into the guy who I think might just be the best of both worlds to kind of bridge the gaps between these two guys we've talked about from the G League Ignite, and that's Zaccharie Risacher from JL Bourg in France. We'll talk about him coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team and faster, and of course, for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users do not visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. You're just not seeing a gigantic portion of the hiring pool. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours of posting a job. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows small businesses are wearing a lot of hats. It's hard to hire and also do all the other things you have to do to run your business. So let LinkedIn do what they've done for 2.5 million small businesses and use them for your hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Back at it here, talking about the lotto-bound wings that just might be there for the Raptors if, in fact, they pick in the top 6. Of course, 54% chance they will not be picking in the top 6 and be conveying their pick to the San Antonio Spurs, which, again, is for me, the canon, the sort of party line of the podcast is conveying is better for the long-term health of the franchise, even if getting one of these wing guys would be nice to add to the team. And you certainly wouldn't be upset by adding them to the mix. I just think the long-term health benefits of conveying this summer are outweighing the very sort of mishmashy, strange group of wings and other players who might be around for the Raptors if they do, in fact, pick in the top 6. Non-Alex Sarr division, of course. Let's get to the final guy we're going to talk about today. That is Zaccharie Risacher, the 6'8" wing from JL Bourg, 19 years old, 6'10" and a half wingspan. So slightly positive wingspan to his 6'8" frame. He's not the 7'4" wingspan type of guy the Raptors tend to love. None of these guys are. But I think with Zaccharie Risacher, the reason I think he's kind of like the bridge between both Holland and Buzelis is I think he profiles as a clear connective role player, and there might be a little bit more to tap into there that's not quite there with Buzelis. I think, with Risacher, first of all, the 3-point shooting track record is there way, 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 way more than it is for Holland or Buzelis. And there's a lot going on right now in terms of like the people who cover this stuff. A lot of concern about a late season swoon from deep for Risacher. He's been very, very bad, like I think sub 20 or sub 30% over the last little stretch of the season here. This comes on the heels of like an insane heater to start the season where he was like north of 50% in his games played, both in the Euro Cup and in his league play in France. He was absolutely scorching the nets. And to me, like, the sort of concern about the slump is, is this his real skill level? Like, I don't think anyone's no one's best heater is representative of their true quality, and no one's worst slump is representative of their true quality. And if Risacher is capable of both insane heaters and big slumps, it probably means he's somewhere in the middle, like a 36, 37, 38% guy. And if he's that, he's way ahead of where Buzelis and Ron Holland are right now, despite similar sort of high 60s, low 70s free throw percentages. He's hit more of his threes. He's hit him at high volume. This season in 45 games across 2 competitions for JL Bourg, Risacher shot 64 of 153 from deep. That's like a pretty high volume for 45 games of play. He was extremely good in the Euro Cup. He shot 32 of 57, 56% in Pro A, League A, whatever the league is called. My bad. For JL Bourg, he shot 33%, 32 of 96. Like, I think it probably ends up somewhere in the middle there, which again is just way ahead of where we see Buzelis and Holland right now. And when you combine that with the other stuff Risacher offers, which I think in particular on-ball defense is the thing that I think really pops for him. Just like really quick sliding his feet, can stay in front of wings, can stay in front of guards, super in on that. He's a really smart cutter and mover as well, which seems like a very Darko Rajakovic friendly set of skills to have. He's like a classic knows where to stand guy, just like a really smart player. His passing chops aren't super high right now, but like you can see he knows what's happening, knows how things are developing, pretty good with his reads. I think those passes will come along. He's only 19 years old. He's playing pro with men in France. Like, I think he might be the guy of these three who I think stands the best chance of being that connective piece with the Raptors' current group of guys, while also still having some upside to tap into. He's not the on-ball player that Ron Holland is right now. He doesn't have the same sort of first step and bounce and juice. And he might never have it. He might not have the handle to get there. Had a lot of trouble getting to and finishing at the rim at times. And so that's a concern. But I think playing in a system like Darko, a Euro-style offense where cutting and movement and three-point shooting are so valuable, I think Risacher offers so much of that compared to what the current iterations of Buzelis and Holland offer now. And again, we can only go off of what we know now. I don't think Risacher's like a high-end ceiling is as high as Ron Holland necessarily, but I think it's probably higher than Matas Buzelis. And so I think just kind of as a happy medium, as a guy who I think is way more of a sure thing to be a productive role player at minimum, a guy who fits with the guys the Raptors already have, I think he's the guy of these three who I think I most prefer. Self-creation is not something he's got in the package right now at all, but like, that's fine. You're on a team with Scottie Barnes and Immanuel Quickley. Most teams drafting this highly are looking for guys to run the show. They're looking for fulcrums. They're looking for, major hub shot creators to drive their rebuilds forward. The Raptors are not a traditional in the lottery team. They have Scottie Barnes, who is, by all accounts, everything the Raptors seem to be saying about him, everything we've seen, or what we saw this past season, he projects to be the best player on this team and like the key fulcrum of a very good basketball team in years to come, We know what Quickley does as a spacer, as a shooter, as a creator, as a playmaker. Like having someone who can fit nicely in there, who would also, again, push RJ Barrett over to the 2, offer some length. A 6'8 dude with a 6'10.5 wingspan in between Scottie Barnes and RJ Barrett sounds pretty darn good to me. He seems like the best shot of these guys that we've talked about today of kind of filling in the OG Anunoby role, right? That sort of hallowed wing stopper 3-and-D guy. It's not an easy thing to find, and Risacher might stand the best chance of that. He's got to get stronger, right? Like against NBA wings, he's probably going to get bullied around a little bit in a way he hasn't quite gotten in France. But like that's something that, if a red flag for any of these guys, and that's something for Buzelis as well, as his strength is a concern. Usually I don't concern myself too much with strength because like most 19-year-olds need to get stronger. It's just like what being a 19-year-old is. We've seen this with Grady Dick, right? And the Raptors clearly put into motion a plan to make him stronger, to build his body. I have no issues with a lack of strength being a red flag coming out of college or coming out of, amateur play or playing in Europe, whatever these guys are playing now. And so with that, I think the red flags for Risacher are like a late season swoon from deep and needs to get stronger, not a ton of off ball juice. All three things I think you can totally live with the overall package you see here, especially in comparison to the other wings in this upper class of the draft. So yeah, for me, he's the guy of these three. And I think for sure I'm not trading back if he's sitting there at 6. I think Risacher, as much as I'll need to figure out how to properly pronounce his name and enunciate it correctly, and that will be a whole journey for me, I'm sure, because those syllables just don't want to work in my mouth. It's bizarre. But I just think he stands a very clear chance of filling all of the needs this team has from the wing spot in a way that I'm not sure Holland and Buzelis do. And so, if he's the only guy there, I'm taking that pick. I'm laughing. I'm moving forward. I'm feeling pretty good about it. If it's Holland or Buzelis there, feel a little better about Holland, but a little more concerned about the fit with Holland. And that's why the trade back thing becomes pretty interesting. Because I bet there's a lot of teams out there who, if Ron Holland's sitting there at 6, might be like, oh, God, we got to get that guy in our team. Like, we need some juice. We need some, creation from the 3 or 4. The Raptors are kind of flush with that at the moment. And so maybe you get a little bidding war going. Maybe you get a team that really just like cannot you just quit thinking about Ron Holland as an upside play for themselves. And maybe you get to benefit that way in terms of adding extra picks later in this year's draft or in future drafts to come. So that's kind of the evaluation on these guys. Again, I'm totally open to being hilariously wrong on this stuff. I do not profess to be a draft expert. I'm just a person who likes to watch hoop and talk about the hoop I watched. And so far, the hoop I've watched between Risacher, Buzelis, and Ron Holland, I think I like the hoop of Risacher the most and sort of what he projects to be in the NBA. Just like a smidge more, just a little bit more. With that, though, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll have more of these draft episodes, obviously, and we'll hopefully get some clarity very, very soon. Well, we will get clarity very, very soon, just under 2 weeks, just over 2 weeks, that is, until the draft lottery. And we can finally figure out what the hell is going to happen with that top 6 pick. But yeah, until then, we'll keep on talking about guys who might be in that range. We'll talk about the other options. Do you go a big like a Donovan Clingan? Do you go a guard like a Nikola Topic or a Stefan Castle? We'll talk about those guys in episodes to come as well. But until then, thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for following, subscribing, rating, reviewing, messing with the show. Always appreciate when you support the show. However it is you support the show. And hey, it's free to support the show. So do something. Like it somewhere. Put it on share it on a social. Put a review. All that good stuff. It always helps us. Puts the algorithm into high gear and all that jazz. So thanks for doing that. We'll be back again next week with our pal Big V on Monday, as usual, to talk about, we'll see what happens. Maybe we'll get on my Brandon Ingram to the Raptors train next week or something like that. Something fun. We'll get into it. It's the off season. It's whack-a-mole. We can talk about whatever we damn well please. And we'll do that starting next week. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye. Ooh.